The Citadel of Judgment floated at the center of the galaxy like a metal god watching over its children. And on this day, it held the fate of an entire species in its cold hands. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in chains before the Assembly of United Species, her uniform torn and her face bruised, but her eyes burning with a fire that made several delegates look away in discomfort. The great chamber stretched for miles in every direction, filled with representatives from 4,000 spacefaring civilizations who had gathered to witness the end of humanity's freedom. High Arbiter Keth Volume rose from his throne of living crystal, his 6 eyes scanning the human woman with a mixture of disgust and relief. For 300 years, your kind has spread across the stars like a disease, he announced, his voice echoing through translation devices in 1,000 languages. You have colonized worlds we marked as forbiddens. You have formed alliances with species we deemed dangerous. And you have refused every attempt to bring you under the protection of galactic law. Elena said nothing, but she allowed herself a small smile that made the Arbiter's scales ripple with irritation. The Assembly has voted, Keth Volume continued, by a margin of 3,912 to 88. Humanity has been declared a Class 7 existential threat to galactic peace and stability. Murmur ran through the chamber as delegates from dozens of species nodded their approval. The 88 who had voted against the measure sat in uncomfortable silence, knowing their objections had meant nothing against the tide of fear that humanity had inspired. You will not execute us then? Elena asked, her voice calm and clear. Keth Volume made a sound that his species used for laughter, a wet clicking that echoed unpleasantly through the chamber. Execute you? Ambassador. We are not barbarians, he said with mock gentleness. No, we have prepared something far more appropriate for your kind. He gestured with one clawed hand and the chamber's great viewing screen flickered to life, showing an image that made Elena's heart grow cold for the first time since her capture. The Eternal Hold, Keth Volume announced with obvious pride. A prison dimension that exists outside normal space and time, created by the architects themselves before they ascended beyond physical form. The screen showed nothing but darkness, an absolute void that seemed to drink in light itself. 17 entities have been imprisoned there across the history of our galaxy. The Arbiter continued. Gods and monsters and things that have no names in any language. Beings so powerful that they could destroy entire star systems with a thought. He turned to face Elena directly, his 6 eyes glittering with satisfaction. None have ever escaped. Ambassador, because there is nothing to escape from. No walls to break, no locks to pick, no physics to exploit. The dimension simply is the prison, and the prison is eternal. Elena felt the weight of those words settle over her like a burial shroud, but she refused to let her fear show on her face. You will condemn 12,000 humans to this fate, she asked quietly. 12,247, Keth Volume corrected her. Every human we captured in the battle for your diplomatic fleet. Every man and woman and child who was foolish enough to trust in humanity's future among the stars. The delegates watched in silence as guards dragged Elena toward the great portal that had opened at the chamber's far end. A doorway into absolute nothing. She did not struggle, and she did not beg. And this simple dignity seemed to unsettle the Assembly more than any amount of screaming would have. Your remaining colonies will be uplifted into compliance, Keth Volume called after her. Your culture will be reformed, your aggression bred out of you over generations. And in time, the galaxy will forget that humans were ever anything more than another peaceful species under Assembly protection. Elena paused at the threshold of the portal and turned to face the chamber one last time. You know nothing about us, she said, and her voice carried clearly across the vast space despite being barely above a whisper. You have studied our biology and our history and our psychology. But you have never understood the one thing that makes us what we are. And what is that? Keth Volume asked with amusement. Hope, Elena answered simply. And then she stepped into the darkness and was gone. One by one, the other human prisoners followed her. Soldiers and scientists and families, with children clutching at their parents' hands. All of them walking into oblivion with their heads held high. Assembly watched until the last human had vanished, and the portal sealed itself behind them with a sound like reality healing from a wound. It is done. Keth Volume announced to thunderous applause. The human problem has been solved, and their chaos ends today. The celebrations lasted 3. Galactic Standard Days delegates feasted and drank and congratulated themselves on finally containing the most unpredictable species the galaxy had ever known. Trade agreements were signed and alliances were strengthened. And everywhere there was talk of a new era of peace and prosperity. On the 4th day, the alarms began. Security Commander Ithala burst into the High Arbiter's private chambers without announcement. Her normally calm demeanor shattered by something that looked very much like terror. "We have a problem," she said. Her voice shaking. Keth Volume looked up from his meal with annoyance. "The humans are contained, Commander. What problem could possibly remain?" Ithala activated her portable display and projected an image that made Keth Volume drop his eating utensils with a clatter. Sensor readings from the Eternal Hold showed something impossible. "They are not dying," Ithala whispered. "They are not going mad. They are not even suffering." The readings showed heat signatures and movement patterns and energy consumption that spoke of organized activity on a massive scale. "They are building something," the commander continued, "in a dimension of pure void where nothing should exist, where thought itself should dissolve into entropy. They are building." Keth Volume stared at the display for a long moment before speaking. "Increase monitoring to maximum," he ordered. "I want to know everything they do." "There is more," Ithala said hesitantly. "The 17 entities we imprisoned there across the ages. The gods and monsters we hoped would torment the humans for eternity. What about them?" Keth Volume demanded. Ithala swallowed hard before answering. "The humans are talking to them, and the entities are talking back." The High Arbiter felt something he had not experienced in centuries of rule. Something his species had evolved beyond countless generations ago. He felt afraid. The Eternal Hold was supposed to be hell itself, a place where consciousness slowly dissolved into nothing over the course of eternity, where even the most powerful beings eventually lost their sense of self and became one with the endless void. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood in that void and refused to accept its rules. "Listen to me," she called out to the 12,000 humans floating in the darkness around her. "This place wants us to give up. It wants us to lie down and fade away. But we are not going to do that." A young soldier named Marcus drifted closer to her, his face pale with fear. "Ambassador, there is nothing here," he said. "No ground beneath our feet, no air to breathe, no light to see by except what comes from our own bodies somehow. How are we supposed to survive in nothing?" Elena reached out and grabbed his hand firmly. "We survive by refusing to die," she said. "Humans have crawled out of ice ages and plagues and world wars. We have walked on the moon and built cities in deserts and found ways to live in places that should have killed us 1,000 times over." She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "This void is just another desert, just another frozen wasteland, just another challenge that the universe has thrown at us. And we will do what humans have always done." "What is that?" Someone called out from the darkness. "We will adapt," Elena answered with fierce determination. "We will build. We will grow. We will make this place our home whether it likes it or not." And so they began. The first days were the hardest as humans learned that the void responded to concentrated will and desperate need. A mother clutching her hungry child discovered that she could pull warmth from her own determination, creating a small bubble of heat that kept her baby alive. Scientists realized that the darkness was not empty, but filled with potential. Raw possibility waiting to be shaped by minds stubborn enough to impose order on chaos. Within a week, they had created their first structure. A platform of solidified will that gave them ground to stand on. Within a month, they had built shelters and started what could only be called farms, growing food from nothing but human stubbornness and the strange energy that flowed through the void when properly directed. Elena watched her people work and felt pride swelling in her chest. "We are not just surviving," she told her inner council during one of their regular meetings. "We are thriving. And that is going to terrify the Assembly more than anything else we could do." Marcus, who had become one of her most trusted advisors, nodded in agreement. "The question is whether we can find a way out," he said. "Surviving here is one thing, but we cannot let our people spend eternity in a prison dimension." "That brings me to our other neighbors," Elena said carefully. She turned to face the darkness beyond their small colony, where massive shapes moved in the void like whales swimming through an ocean of shadow. The 17 had been imprisoned here long before humanity existed. Ancient beings of such power that the early civilizations of the galaxy had deemed them too dangerous to kill and too terrible to release. At first, the humans had avoided them, keeping their distance from entities that radiated wrongness and alien hunger. But Elena had watched them carefully, and she had noticed something interesting. "They are lonely," she said. Simply. Marcus stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Ambassador, those things destroyed entire civilizations before they were captured. The historical records speak of planets burned to ash and stars snuffed out like candles. And yet here they float in eternal darkness with no one to talk to and nothing to do," Elena replied. "Tell me, Marcus, what do you think 1,000 years of isolation does to a being, even a god?" She began walking toward the nearest entity, a creature of shifting geometry and impossible angles that hurt the eyes to look at directly. "Ambassador, you cannot be serious," Marcus called after her. "Stay here and keep everyone calm," Elena ordered without looking back. "I am going to make some new friends." The being noticed her approach and turned what might have been its attention toward her tiny form. Elena felt madness pressing against the edges of her mind, felt reality trying to fold in on itself around her, felt terror so pure and absolute that her legs wanted to give out beneath her as she kept walking. "Hello," she said when she was close enough to be heard. "My name is Elena, and my people are new here. I thought we should introduce ourselves." The entity made a sound that was not a sound, a vibration that passed through her body and left strange images flickering behind her eyes. It was laughing at her. "Yes, I know we are small and weak and probably look like insects to you," Elena continued calmly. "But we are also the first beings to talk to you. And how long exactly?" The laughter stopped. "I thought so," Elena said with a small smile. "Here is what I am thinking. You have been trapped here for ages beyond counting, and so have we, which means we have a common enemy in the Assembly that put us all here. More strange vibrations, more impossible images." And slowly Elena began to understand what the entity was trying to communicate. You cannot escape on your own, because the prison is designed to contain beings of pure power, she said slowly, working through the concept. But we are not beings of pure power. We are beings of pure stubbornness, and that is something different entirely. She looked up at the vast impossible shape before her and made the craziest offer of her diplomatic career. "Help us understand this prison, and we will find a way out for all of us. In return, I give you my word that humanity will never forget those who stood with us in the dark." The entity was silent for a long moment. Then it reached out with something that was not quite a limb and touched Elena's forehead with impossible gentleness. Knowledge flooded into her mind. "Burning and beautiful," secrets about the nature of the prison that no organic being had ever known. When she returned to the human colony hours later, her nose was bleeding and her hands were shaking, but her eyes were bright with triumph. "I know how we get out," she announced to her astonished people. "The Eternal Hold is not a cage," she explained. "It is a wound in reality, a place where the universe was cut open to create a pocket of nothing. And like any wound, it can heal." She smiled a smile that Marcus found both inspiring and terrifying. "We just need to convince it that it wants to heal with us on the other side." Over the following months, the humans worked alongside beings that had once been worshipped as gods and feared as demons. They shared stories around campfires that burned with void light, traded knowledge and songs and the simple comfort of company in an endless darkness, and slowly, impossibly, the 17 ancient prisoners began to remember what it felt like to have friends. The Assembly had made a terrible miscalculation. They had not trapped the humans with monsters. They had given the monsters something far more dangerous than freedom. They had given them hope. Time moved differently in the Eternal Hold, stretching and folding like cloth in a strong wind. And what felt like 11 months to the humans was barely a heartbeat in the universe outside. But in those 11 months, Elena Vasquez had achieved something that the greatest minds of 4,000 civilizations had declared impossible. She had united the 17 IMPR ISONED entities under a single cause, the being called Vorthon the Endless, who had once consumed entire star systems for pleasure, now spent his days teaching human children how to shape the void into toys and games. The thing known only as the Weeping Dark, whose mere presence had driven whole planets to madness, had found peace in listening to human songs and stories around the evening fires, even the most terrible of them all. An entity so ancient that it had forgotten its own name and was known only as the First Silence, had grown fond of Elena's habit of visiting it each morning to share her plans and concerns. "You are strange creatures," the First Silence told her one day in a voice that resonated through her bones. "You are small and fragile, and your lives are over in what feels like moments to us. Yet you burn so brightly." Elena smiled up at the vast presence that loomed above her. "We know we do not have much time," she replied. "That is why we try to fill every moment with meaning, with connection, with love." "Love," the First Silence repeated, tasting the word as if it were something exotic and unfamiliar. We had forgotten that word and what it meant. "Thank you for reminding us." These conversations happened while human engineers worked alongside cosmic entities to understand the nature of their prison, finding the weak points in reality where the wound could be encouraged to heal in a specific direction. Marcus led the technical teams, translating the incomprehensible knowledge that the 17 shared into something that human hands could work with. "The boundary is weakest here," he explained to Elena during one of their planning sessions, pointing to a map that existed more as a shared mental image than a physical object. "If we can concentrate enough, well, at this point, while the 17 push from their side, we might be able to create a tier." "Might?" Elena asked with a raised eyebrow. "Ambassador, we are trying to break out of a prison that has held god-level entities for billions of years," Marcus said with a tired laugh. "Might is the best guarantee I can give you." Elena nodded and turned to face the assembled crowd of humans and entities that had gathered for this moment. "My friends," she began, and she meant both words equally. "We have spent these months learning to work together, learning to trust each other, learning that the differences between us matter far less than the bonds we have built." She paused, looking at the faces of her people and the impossible forms of their allies. "Today we test those bonds in the greatest challenge any of us have ever faced. Today we break out of eternity itself." The humans moved to their positions, forming a massive circle around the weak point that Marcus had identified. The 17 took their places as well, their enormous presences pressing against the boundaries of the prison with a combined force that made the void itself tremble. Elena stood at the center of it all, her hand raised to give the signal. "Remember," she called out, "this is not about power alone." The prison was built to resist power, but it was not built to resist hope. It was not built to resist friendship. It was not built to resist love. She brought her hand down. Now, 12,000 humans focused their will on a single point, pouring every ounce of their stubborn determination into the effort. At the same moment, the 17 unleashed forces that had not been felt in the universe since the dawn of time. Cosmic energies that warped reality around them like water swirling down a drain. The boundary of the eternal hold began to shake in the citadel of judgment. Alarms screamed to life as sensors detected something that should have been impossible. Security Commander Athea burst onto the monitoring deck with her heart pounding in terror. "What is happening?" she demanded. The technicians at their stations were too shocked to respond, their eyes fixed on displays that showed the eternal hold's boundary membrane bending and stretching in ways it had never done before. "They are trying to break out?" one of them finally whispered. "That is impossible," Ithala snapped. "The eternal hold has contained beings of immense power for billions of years. A handful of humans cannot possibly break through." But even as she spoke, the readings continued to climb, and she felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. "Alert the High Arbiter," she ordered, "and begin mobilizing the defense fleet." Back in the prison dimension, Elena watched as the boundary began to tear, reality splitting like fabric under too much strain, but it was not breaking in the violent way that pure force would have caused. It was opening. The wound in reality was not being ripped further apart, but was instead being convinced to heal, to close, to push everything inside it back into the normal universe. "It is working," Marcus shouted over the roaring sound of existence rewriting itself. "The boundary is accepting us. It wants to let us out." Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she watched the darkness split open to reveal stars, real stars, burning in real space, more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. "Everyone through," she commanded. "Quickly now. We do not know how long it will stay open." The humans rushed toward the opening, carrying their children and their wounded, and the precious supplies they had created in their months of imprisonment. The 17 followed, their massive forms shrinking and shifting to fit through the tear in ways that defied understanding. Elena was the first to step through, her feet touching the cold metal of the Citadel's outer hull as she emerged back into normal space. She looked up and saw the great station looming above her, saw the lights of 1,000 ships beginning to move in response to the breach, and she smiled. Behind her came her people, blinking in the sudden brightness of real light, gasping at the feel of real air filling their lungs. Behind them came the 17, no longer prisoners, no longer alone, ready to stand beside the small, fierce creatures who had given them back something they had lost long. Ugo High Arbiter Cathvolume watched the feed from his command throne, his 6 eyes wide with horror as impossible things emerged from a prison that should have held them forever. "What have we done?" he whispered as the last of the Andes passed through and the breach sealed itself behind. The ambassador Elena Vasquez stood on the hull of the Citadel of Judgment, surrounded by her people and her impossible allies, and she looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting her image across the galaxy. "We are back," she said simply. And in those 2 words was a promise that made entire civilizations tremble. "And we have brought friends." The Assembly's response was immediate and overwhelming, a display of military force that had not been seen in the galaxy for 10,000 years. 12,000 warships from 300 species converged on the Citadel of Judgment, their weapons charged and their crews ready to destroy the humans and their impossible allies once and for all. High Arbiter Keth Volume stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with grim satisfaction. "They are outnumbered 1,000 to 1, he announced to his officers. "Even with those creatures supporting them, they cannot possibly survive this engagement," his tactical advisor, a being of pure crystal who processed information faster than any organic mind, flickered with uncertainty. "High Arbiter, the entities they have allied with are among the most powerful beings ever recorded in galactic history," she warned. "Our weapons may not be effective against them. Then we will destroy the humans and leave the entities with no allies." Keth Volume replied coldly. "Without their little pets to give them purpose, those creatures will return to the mindless destruction they were known for. We will deal with them then." He opened a communication channel to all ships in the fleet. "This is your High Arbiter speaking. Today we correct a mistake that should never have happened. Today we end the human threat forever. Fire at will." The sky around the Citadel erupted in light as thousands of weapons discharged simultaneously. Beams of energy and missiles and exotic munitions, streaking toward the tiny cluster of humans on the station's hull. The 17 Mothervorthen the Endless stretched himself across space like a living shield, his impossible body absorbing attacks that would have destroyed moons. The Weeping Dark sang a song of sorrow so profound that entire ship crews fell to their knees weeping, their fingers too shaky to press the firing controls. The first silence simply existed more strongly in certain areas, and in those areas weapons ceased to function because the concept of violence temporarily stopped being real impossible. Keth Volume breathed as he watched his opening salvo accomplish nothing. But the 17 were not fighting to destroy. They were fighting to protect. And there is a difference between those two things that the Assembly had never understood. The real horror came when the humans began their counterattack. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had spent her months in the Eternal Hold preparing for this moment, training her people in tactics that no military academy in the galaxy had ever conceived. "All teams, begin boarding operations," she commanded through the communication network they had established using Voidlight technology. Small groups of humans launched themselves from the Citadel's hull toward the nearest enemy ships, using salvaged shuttlecraft and improvised propulsion systems, and in some cases, nothing but EVA suits and sheer audacity. Marcus led one of the first teams, a squad of 30 soldiers targeting a massive carrier from the Ken hegemony. "They will be expecting us to target engineering or the bridge," he told his people as they approached. "Instead, we go for life support. When they cannot breathe, they cannot fight." They breached the hull using cutting tools made from crystallized void stuff. Harder than any material the galaxy had ever produced, the Kthin defenders were waiting for them with weapons ready. Confident in their superior numbers and technology, they were not prepared for humans. The fighting in those corridors was brutal and fast. Hand-to-hand combat in tight spaces, where the humans' death world evolution gave them every advantage. Soldiers discovered that humans could function with wounds that would kill any reasonable species 3 times over. They learned that humans did not stop fighting when they were injured, but instead fought harder, as if pain were fuel rather than a warning. They found out that humans could improvise weapons from anything, turning wall panels and broken equipment, and even their own broken bones, into tools of violence within 20 minutes. Marcus and his team had taken the carrier. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as human boarding parties struck ship after ship with terrifying efficiency. But it was not just their effectiveness that horrified the Assembly forces, was the way the humans fought. They laughed in the middle of combat, with energy beams sizzling past their heads and alien warriors trying to tear them apart. The humans laughed and joked and called out encouragement to each other. A woman named Sarah sang old Earth War songs, While she held a corridor against a dozen attackers, a teenager named James quoted something called Shakespeare as he disabled a ship's main reactor. Ambassador Vasquez herself led an assault on the Citadel's shield generators while reciting poetry about going gently into good nights, her voice calm and clear, even as she fought through wave after wave of defenders. Commander Ithala watched from her dying cruiser as humans swarmed across its hull, their small figures somehow more terrifying than the cosmic entities that loomed in the background. "They are insane," she whispered to herself. "They are completely and utterly insane." But as she watched more closely, she realized that was not quite right. The humans were not insane. They were simply operating from a completely different understanding of what combat meant to the assembly species. Warfare was about calculation, about measuring risks and rewards, and only fighting when the odds favored survival to humans. Warfare was about something else entirely, something primal and fierce and utterly alien to minds that had evolved in gentle environments. Humans did not fight because they thought they would. When they fought, because fighting was what they were, victory and defeat were secondary to the act itself, to the defiant stand against impossible odds, to the refusal to surrender, even when logic screamed that surrender was the only rational choice. This was what the elder races had always feared. Ithala realized not human intelligence or human technology or even human violence. It was human spirit. That inexplicable fire that burned in them regardless of circumstances. That flame that not even eternity in a prison dimension could extinguish in 6 hours. The greatest fleet in galactic history was broken. Ships drifted, dead in space, or fled at maximum speed, or hung in position, with human flags flying from their hulls. The Citadel of Judgment itself had fallen, its defenders overwhelmed by boarding parties that had turned the station's own systems against them. High Arbiter Keth Volume knelt on the bridge of his captured flagship. His hands bound and his pride shattered. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before him, her diplomatic uniform replaced by salvaged armor, her face streaked with blood and soot. "You have destroyed everything," Keth Volume said bitterly. Elena shook her head slowly. "We have destroyed nothing that did not need to fall," she replied. "Your assembly was built on fear and control, on the suppression of anything that might challenge your comfortable order." She knelt down to meet his eyes directly. "Today that order ends, and something new begins. What will you do now?" The Arbiter asked, and for the first time in his long life, there was genuine fear in his voice. "Will you conquer us all? Will you do to us what we tried to do to you?" Elena stood and turned to look out at the stars, at the scattered wreckage of the battle, at the 17 who floated peacefully in the void watching over their small friends. "No," she said quietly. "That was never what this was about." She smiled a tired smile. "Now comes the hard part." The assembly chamber had never been so quiet, where thousands of delegates had once debated and argued and shaped the fate of civilizations. Now there was only emptiness and echoes. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked alone through the vast space, her footsteps echoing off walls that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic history behind her, visible through the great windows. The 17 floated in formation around the Citadel like guardian spirits watching over a sacred place. She reached the central podium where high arbiters had stood for millennia and paused to look at the empty thrones that surrounded her. Each throne had been carved for a specific species, shaped to accommodate their unique biology. And together, they represented the diversity of intelligent life in the galaxy. Now they sat vacant. Their owners fled or captured or simply too afraid to return. Elena activated the broadcast system with a simple gesture, her image appearing on screens across 4,000 worlds. Billions of beings stopped whatever they were doing to watch, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and desperate curiosity. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I am the ambassador of Earth and the voice of humanity in this moment." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 300 years ago, my species reached the stars and found that we were not alone. We found civilizations that had existed for millions of years, cultures that had achieved wonders beyond our imagination. Being so different from us that communication seemed impossible, a small smile crossed her face. We tried to make friends. That was always our first instinct, to reach out, to connect, to find common ground with these strange and wonderful neighbors. The smile faded, but the galaxy was afraid of us. They called us Deathworlders, monsters, chaos incarnate. They saw our short lives and our fierce emotions and our stubborn refusal to accept limits. And they decided we were a threat that needed to be contained. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes burning with quiet intensity. So they put us in a cage. They threw us into the darkest prison in existence and congratulated themselves on solving the human problem. Her voice hardened. They were wrong. She gestured at the windows behind her, at the 17 who waited patiently in the void. In that darkness we found others who had been abandoned and forgotten. Beings of immense power who had been locked away because the galaxy could not understand them. Gods and monsters who had spent billions of years alone. And do you know what we did with those terrifying creatures? Elena asked. We talked to them. We shared our stories and listened to theirs. We found the loneliness beneath their rage and the sorrow beneath their destruction. We became friends. She let that word hang in the air for a moment. That is what the Assembly never understood about humanity. We do not fear what is different. We are fascinated by it. We do not destroy what we cannot control. We try to understand it. Our greatest weapon has never been our violence. Though we are capable of terrible violence when pushed, our greatest weapon is our capacity for connection. Elena spread her hands wide, encompassing the empty chamber and the watching galaxy beyond. The Assembly is dissolved. As of this moment, there is no central authority governing the species of this galaxy. You are all free to make your own choices, to form your own alliances, to build your own futures. A murmur of shock and confusion rippled across countless worlds. Some of you are afraid right now, Elena acknowledged. You are wondering what happens without the Assembly to maintain order. Who will resolve disputes? Who will protect the weak from the strong? She smiled again, warm and genuine this time. The answer is all of us. Together, humanity is not going to conquer anyone. We are not going to impose our will on species who do not wish to follow us. We learned long ago that empires built on force always crumble in the end. Instead, we are going to do what we have always done best. We are going to help. She began to walk slowly around the podium as she spoke. If your world is sick, human doctors will come to heal it. If your technology is failing, human engineers will help you fix it. If your people are hungry, human farmers will teach them to grow food in places they never thought possible. We will ask nothing in return except friendship. Some of you will refuse us, and that is your right. We will respect your boundaries and leave you in peace. Some of you will accept us reluctantly, waiting for the trick, waiting for the trap. We will prove our sincerity through action, not words. And some of you, Elena's voice softened, some of you will welcome us as the friends we have always wanted to be. She stopped and faced the camera one final time. The galaxy watched in horror as we escaped from the Assembly. I understand that fear. I truly do. We are strange and loud, and we feel everything so intensely that it must seem like madness to species who evolved in gentler circumstances. But I want you to understand something about that horror. Her expression became serious. We also remember those who put us in the dark. We remember the delegates who voted to imprison 12,000 innocent people, including children, in a dimension of eternal nothing. We remember the species who cheered when we vanished. We do not forget, and we do not forgive easily. But And here her voice gentled again. We also remember kindness. We remember the 88 delegates who voted against our imprisonment. We remember the species who spoke up for us, even when it was unpopular. We remember our friends in the dark. The 17 who could have ignored us or destroyed us, but instead chose to hope alongside us. Humanity carries all of this with us. The good and the bad, the love and the anger. That is what it means to be human. Elena straightened her shoulders. So here is my message to the galaxy. We are here. We are not going away. And we want to know you. Come find us if you want to talk. Stay away if you prefer solitude. But know that wherever you are and whatever you are doing, there are humans somewhere nearby who would love to hear your story. The Assembly tried to contain our chaos. Instead, they set it free. I think, in time, you will find that this is not the disaster you fear. It might just be the beginning of something wonderful. The broadcast ended across the galaxy. Billions of beings sat in silence. Processing what they had just witnessed, some felt fear, deep and primal. The terror of prey in the presence of a predator they did not understand, but others felt something different. Something that surprised them. They felt hope in the weeks and months that followed. Ships began arriving at Earth's colonies. Tentative visitors from species who had never dared to defy the Assembly before, they found humans who greeted them with open arms, who asked about their cultures and their families and their dreams, who offered food and shelter and the simple gift of genuine interest. The 17 dispersed across the galaxy as well. These ancient beings finding purpose in protecting the small creatures who had shown them kindness in the dark, and slowly, impossibly, the galaxy began to change, not through conquest or force or the imposition of human will, but through something far more powerful and far more terrifying to those who had ruled through fear, through friendship. 50 years later, Elena Vasquez, now elderly but still sharp-eyed and fierce, sat in a garden on a world that had once considered humans to be monsters. Children of a dozen species played around her while their parents watched. With easy smiles, a young journalist asked her how she wanted to be remembered. Elena laughed and shook her head. I do not want to be remembered at all, she said. I want people to forget that there was ever a time when the species of this galaxy were afraid of each other. She looked up at the sky where ships from 100 worlds passed peacefully overhead. That is the future worth fighting for, she said softly. Not monuments or glory or the memory of war. Just this. Just friends, sharing a beautiful day, wondering what adventures tomorrow might bring. The journalist nodded and put away her recording device. Thank you, Ambassador. Elena smiled. Call me Elena, she said. After all, that is what friends do. And in that garden, on that peaceful world, surrounded by the laughter of children who had never known fear, the woman who had once led humanity out of eternal darkness closed her eyes and was content. The galaxy had watched in horror as the humans escaped from the Assembly. Now it watched in wonder as those same humans showed them what they had been missing all along. Not power, not control, not the cold comfort of rules and order, but connection and hope and love.